Right, so I think it's fairly obvious to anybody that keeps an eye on UK karting that we seem to have like this plethora of national kart series this year that it's not come out of nowhere, because we've always kind of had standalone series that have existed, but this year it just seems like there's a lot. I don't know if it's the way that marketing works online now, and you're even if you're just a sort of a bystander in karting or do a bit of club racing, you can't help but see these posts from these championships, But it does feel this year that we've got a lot of championships. We've got a couple of new boys on the scene. In the past, Formula 6 or Easy Kart and all that kind of stuff may have existed on its own, and you'd see bits of it, but it wouldn't be so in your face like it is now, because everybody's competing so hard via social media to get a bit of traction. And we are really seeing all of these separate series, and it's like, wow, we seem to have a lot. And I think this year, I think it's the most we've ever had. We've got a couple of new guys coming in, and each of these series kind of vary and differ. But I think this year, we're starting to see that there's a lot of overlap between them, and trying to get to the root of why there is so many championships is quite a complex process. But I think there's a number of reasons, and which I'll go into in a second. But I think one of the things, so first of all, we might want to say what are the new series and this year. So I think we've got the one that's most intriguing is probably the Ultimate Karting Championship, and the guy that runs that's called Paul Fellon. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And I was slightly suspicious of what they were doing at the beginning, because it didn't kind of make sense to me. All I saw was a website and a few Instagram pictures, and I was like, what are they doing? What's going on? What's their sort of MO, or what are they doing? And I sort of did a bit of digging, and some of their initial calendar is not the calendar that they have now. So I was kind of like thinking, what's going on? But in the last few weeks, I think with the addition of Super Cadet, which runs 950 chassis, for those that don't understand, and I don't really, they're sort of a chassis between a cadet and a full-size sort of junior/senior car. With that addition, I think they've attracted a few teams like Fusion and so on. So at the moment, it appears they've got traction, but seeing is believing, because there's one thing announcing a kart series, and there's another thing like running an event, right? So you've got all that to go through. But I think they're new guys, and then we've got the Cadet Kart Championship that's coming in, which looks like it's going to be really popular. Because cadet karting is like a real kind of a good place to start, because there's a lot of competitors. I think cadet and junior karting is much bigger than senior karting at the moment, especially in kind of championship level racing, and that looks really good. But yeah, we're seeing these sort of, and I keep seeing this new this amount of championships seems to keep growing and growing, and we've got to ask ourselves why that is. I mean, if we go back to last year, I don't think this is the start of it. And I like to say there's other championships as well, like the NKC. We've got Easy Cup coming in, and they're all offering their individual things, right? And they are serving a market demand. So I don't want to be disparaging and say, oh, there's too many championships and stuff like that, because if they're serving a demand, then who am I to say they're not worthwhile, right? So why have we come to this point where I think we're seeing championships kind of overlap? So if we take maybe Super 1 and what happened last year when Motorsport UK came in and basically at the last minute pulled the rug out of underneath John Hoyle and said, right, we're going to be running our own championships, right? And they took all of his kind of recognition. Super 1 was forced to run as IKR, independent. So we saw this split, and then so we've gone from one sort of central championship to two. And then with this year, I think we're seeing Ultimate Kart Championship come in. And I don't know where that's going to be, but I'm not going to say whether that's going to be successful or not, but the fact that they've come in signals something quite interesting. So when the MSA or Motorsport UK started up their new championships, what they did, which was kind of, I think it made sense, but I think what it has done is it's devalued something, and it's allowed other championships more of a voice and a authenticity that they might not have had before. Let me explain. So for years, the Motorsport UK, or the MSA, British Karting Championship, was a tangible championship that meant something. Every year you had one senior British champion and one junior British champion and one cadet, right? And that was it. So if you ever go back to the 90s, and you'll be able to go on YouTube and you can watch, you know, British Karting Championship Super 1, and you can watch Mike Spencer or Bobby Game, right? And these were the kind of, it was the top end of the sport in this UK. And I give Motorsport UK a lot of hassle, really, and I'm a big supporter of independent kart racing, but there's still a part of me that likes the idea of there being one championship that everyone aspires to be the champion of. You know, the Formula 1 of karting, or, you know, the British Superbikes has everything, the British Touring Cars, and we have the British Karting Championship, which is for the CIK classes, multiple manufacturer, you know, cutthroat racing, you know, the real deal, the stuff that gets you excited, where you go and watch and you know all the drivers and that kind of thing. And that was a part of the reason why I raced in the British Championship in 2011, because the fact that I could enter it was a nonsense, because I think you should have qualifiers, really, but there wasn't the numbers for it. And that's why I entered, because I was trying to say, this is the pinnacle of British karting, and as a culture we just don't seem to value it. And I actually wrote an article around that time saying, you know, you should give the British Championship to Rotax, and it was like a defeatist article, because at the time the CIK classes were dying in this country. Even with the hundreds, the numbers from club racing had gone, and we're sort of struggling to get the national grid together for the British Championships and the national ICA and all that. So as time went on, after 2011, KF really ballsed it up, because it was a complete nightmare. Too expensive. And then OK came in, and it kind of still struggled, and then the Motorsport UK made it a single spec OK series that actually worked quite well, but I think that was because it was subsidised, really. But there was a grid of it, but to me it was great in one sense, because I think the drivers enjoyed racing the CIK karts, but because it was just Vortexes, it lacked a little bit of flavour. And then obviously that all disappeared when it wasn't really sustainable in the form that it was created in. So then we're left in a situation where we don't really have a British Karting Championship. We have it in all but name, but what's left is you have the National Rotax Championship. And I know this is kind of semantics, but you know, Rotax had the ABKC national title, and TKM was the ABKC national TKM. It was the commercial classes weren't official British classes. And then in 2019, Motorsport UK decided that they would give official British Karting Championship status to Rotax, TKM and X30. Now this was quite a shrewd move, because they allowed drivers to be racing the official British Karting Championship terms, and the title and the prestige that brings, you see. And that was a good way to sort of really get the drivers out of Super 1 and into the new British Championships. But what has happened is the British, the Motorsport UK, I think have, in that move, even though they didn't have a class for the British Karting Championship, it was just there as a name, but the CIK classes had died. But by giving it out, they'd basically decreased the value of what the British Karting Championship as a term meant. So Super 1 can come in, and now they're independent, so they don't have to adhere to MSA regulations about what you can call yourself, because technically prior to 2019, if you were the X30 champion or the Rotax champion or the TKM championship, you were the APKC national champion. You weren't a British karting champion, an MSA British karting champion. But when they gave it to those classes, it gave license to Super 1 and other people to go, do you know what, why not, they can call themselves the British Karting Championship, because they're running X30 Rotax, just like the British, the MSA class, the MSA series, and it's got, sort of has the same weight, because if Motorsport UK aren't cherishing the name and saying, no, actually, British Karting Championship as a term should be just for one class, a multi-make class, like proper racing, everybody can call themselves it. So weirdly enough, they kind of devalued their own championships in a way, and I know it probably doesn't really affect the sport as a whole, but I think psychologically there's a subtle effect where a British title with Motorsport UK Is it any different than a Super 1 one? Well, there's a lot of drivers in Motorsport UK, but it just confuses things a little. So from someone like me who wants the idea to have drivers that you can look up to in a single class, like seeing Danny Curl race X30, it's like, mate, it would have been great to see Danny Curl and Joe Turney and who else is there? See, names, because we don't have this sort of single title in the UK now. The names sort of like they come in and go, but you don't see those guys racing for the British Karting Championship. It's the X30 British. It's just like, fine, I get it, but in doing that, it's devalued it, and I think it allows people to come in like the UKC, and let's face it, at this point on this recording date, Ultimate Karting Championship is making everyone else look like mugs on social media, because Motorsport UK have got a few posts from the awards evening which look boring and dull. Super 1 is kind of a bit dated in how they present themselves, and this Paul guy is just posting up nice photos, he's tagging in people, and it is just social media, because once you get to the gritty of racing, it's a different ball game. But the Motorsport UK have just given invitation to all these series come in, and they can come in and say, look, we can call ourselves a British Championship or a British Karting Championship, and who's going to know any different? Motorsport UK don't cherish the one thing that they have that's of value, because they've just given it to all the other classes. So, though it might not explain why there's so many national championships this year, I think psychologically, the Motorsport UK unwittingly and unknowingly have devalued their own product. And I think that will have an effect long term, especially when newcomers are coming in and they're doing things and it just looks nicer, you know. And I have my doubts about the Ultimate Karting Championship initially, but just visually they just seem more interesting. They seem a bit more alive. They're not doing anything particularly new, they're just covering the basics. So Motorsport UK have to be really careful, and I think they've invited, in splitting with Super 1, I think they've invited and they've inspired people, because with what John Hoyle has done, he's survived. And him surviving and starting the Vortex thing is allowed other people to look at that and go, do you know what? We can do it too. So that explains one of the reasons. I think another one of the reasons is, I think culturally karting is migrating away from club racing or club racing at a single circuit to a more national club racing. So if we go back to, what was it? I think, who were the first? You know, you've always had like Formula 6 and the 4-Straight thing, which were IKR back in the day. And we've had these sort of little hubs like Easy Kart as well when they first started. They come in and they feel more like clubs that just travel around the country. So, I mean, National Kart Championship, there were clubs at heart that travelled about. And I think as we're seeing a kind of a death of not a death of club racing, but I think Motorsport UK clubs, especially on the periphery, you know, like Rower is struggling for entries. I think that's partly because people are moving away from racing club levels and they're just doing national racing instead. And I think that's just a cultural shift. And yeah, I mean, I remember back in the day in the 90s, you know, club racing, even though I never knew there was a club championship, and I think my brother Terence come second in one or won it. He didn't even know that he'd won it. But I still think club racing is... IKR has kept it alive, which is fantastic. I think, you know, I think, you know, that's been a real kind of... that's kept these clubs going. But I think as a culture, the club scene has definitely moved more into a national spectrum. So, yeah, we've seen that come in. Yeah, and I can see why people would be confused by it, and why do we have so many series and that kind of thing. But I think it's like if you see these national series more like clubs rather than new championships, it starts to make sense, because we do have a lot of clubs in this country. We have 10, 20, 30, 40 or whatever the number is. So and they all have their own championships. I just think we've migrated to a more national thing. I think IKR, even though prior to 2013, when the name was coined, or 2014 on the Karting One forum by Kai Atwood, you obviously have non-MSA, so IKR is not a new thing. But I think changing the name has just given it the concept of racing outside of the MSA, a kind of, or the Motorsport UK, it has allowed people a little bit more. It's given them a bit of bravery to go, do you know what, it is possible. So we've seen that kind of thing where people are running more, thinking, you know what, I can do it. Like, you know, Darren Beavers with the Bambino kart thing. You know, those little things that there's things that you just don't hear about. You don't hear spoken about a lot, but these small little changes, you know, like when Ixo XR50 started their championship in late 2000s. And that was another Motorsport UK self-injury, because basically within Motorsport UK regulations at the time, you couldn't have they wouldn't accept a class that was above 30 horsepower that wasn't CIK homologated. So the XR50 boys just started their own series, you know, and it was that kind of thing is why you just see this peripheral. Just drop my tea. You're seeing this kind of expansion in championships. So I know I've waffled on a bit, but I just wanted to really make a point to say that we have acknowledged that we do seem to have more championships than ever, and I guess that's kind of the reason why I've wanted to do the Budget Kart Challenge, because I think we seem to forget that the clubs still are the first port of call for a lot of novices and rookies, and places like Woodthorpe and Stretton and these little clubs that you never really hear much about, they do a great job of bringing people into the sport. So I just wanted to make sure that with this, we're celebrating them a bit more. So, right, if I haven't bored you enough with that, you know, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. Oh, I hate saying all this because every YouTuber does it, but yeah, Facebook, you know the drill. Patreon, you know, thanks to everybody that signed up to that. The PayPal donations as well made a huge difference. Obviously, you've got the Budget Kart behind me, which I've just spoken about. Yeah, we've got it started. Just got to make sure everything's tickety-boo. Make sure all the bolts are tightened. And I did a really stupid thing the other day. I actually turned a bolt, or there's a stop thing you can put in the top of the engine, and I just turned it. So I had to get that out. This water cooling luck is a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Give me an air cool. Give me my hundreds back. And anyway, yeah, thanks for watching. If you've got any comments or anything like that about this subject, leave them below. Yeah, and I'll see you soon. We'll have a video up soon, I guess, the next one before we actually go to Woodthorpe. So yeah, thanks for watching.